Off the coast of Senegal sits Gorée Island, and for centuries it was one of the last places enslaved Africans saw before being shipped across the Atlantic.
Nelson Mandela, Pope John Paul II, and Barack Obama have all made the visit to a place that became one of the first World Heritage Sites in 1978.
We've gathered the history, the controversy, and essential travel tips for this island of remembrance of one of the biggest tragedies in human history. Let's step onto Gorée right after the intro.
Welcome to World Heritage Rookies, the podcast where we explore UNESCO World Heritage Sites one episode at a time. We are Lina
and Ralph, and we will travel alongside you to some of the most stunning sites our world has to offer.
Each week, we dive into the history, fun facts, and reasons why World Heritage Sites matter for humanity, sharing our own discoveries and travel tips along the way.
So, let's dive in and learn about some World Heritage together.
Welcome everybody to our episode number 11. If you're new here, welcome. I know we say it every episode, but we really appreciate new audience and we're really happy to have you here. And here I am with
Ralph, and also we say it every episode, but if you're back, also thank you very much for this and sticking with us talking about World Heritage Sites.
So today it's completely on Ralph. So Ralph, what are we going to be talking today about?
Today we're going to talk about the island of Gorée, which I think will have a special place in our episode so far, because the first World Heritage Site where we mostly focus on something that is not like a natural wonder or natural beauty or like a great cultural achievement or cultural marvel we can look at. It's actually something about remembering one of the worst events that happened in human history, which I think is an interesting take, telling that World Heritage Sites are not here just to celebrate what is great. They are also there to help us remember what might not be great, but is still be part of our human history.
I think that that's really interesting take. Indeed, it's the first place in memory of a horrible event. But at the same time, I think that sometimes these memorial sites we had visited, some of them are some of the most interesting because they're really there to remind us what we could do if we don't remember what we have done through history.
Yes, exactly. And this is a good example of it, what we're going to talk about today. And I think you will find it quite interesting because I personally learned a lot about something that I was not that familiar about as I should be, which is, again, a good sign that we get to think about these horrible events in a way and could learn it through World Heritage Sites. But I also have to admit, I think this is so far the episode where I'm most conflicted about, because I don't want to give away too much, but there has been some kind of controversy going on with Gorée Island and what it entails and what it means. And I'm going to come to this back later. And that was something very interesting for me also during the research. So I'm very curious later to hear your thoughts about it. But yes, perhaps before we jump into more of the details, as usual, Lina, what do you know about the island of Gorée?
Absolutely nothing. Thank you so much.
Okay, then...
I'm sorry. I don't really know anything. This one, I'm going completely blank.
Then I'm very happy that I will for sure be able to teach you something in this episode and hopefully also to our audience. All right. So... history of the island of Gorée. So first, to know what we're talking about. So Gorée Island, it's a teeny tiny island. Apparently it's only 900 meters long and 350 meters wide. And it's just right off the coast of Senegal's capital, Dakar. And so yeah, we're talking here about a World Heritage Site in the country of Senegal. And the name Gorée is a French adaptation of the original Dutch name given to the island, which was apparently, Gorée, or however you pronounce it in Dutch. My Dutch is not the best. And apparently this name is derived from a word in Dutch which means goede rede, which means good anchorage, signifying that it's a safe place for ships to anchor around that. So it's an island right off the coast of Senegal, and it has been very, very important over the centuries. So because it really is basically on the western part of Africa and therefore is somewhat like the closest possible to the Americas when you're traveling around there. And sort of as a result for this, it became like a really important point for different European colonial powers around.
So it was like a safe post before arriving to the Americas.
Yeah, so it was a good place to anchor for your ships, and it was, well, we're still talking about a long journey to the Americas, but it was one of the closest possible positions you could be with your ships before traveling to the Americas.
Before crossing the Atlantic.
Yeah, exactly. And nothing surprising there when you can imagine, because of this strategic position, it has been like changing hands between the different colonial powers. So the first bigger colonial power that was in control of it were actually the Portuguese in the 15th century. So they reached the island in the 1440s, built their like early houses, and actually they began to export enslaved Africans from the year 1536 onward. So this is already like here of a beginning showing what it was used for, unfortunately. And over the following centuries, really the possession of the island changed multiple times. So you had the Dutch, the British, the Portuguese, and the French that were owning the island over various times in the centuries because of its important strategic position. For the longest time, it was governed mostly then by the French. And the French were also, if I saw it correctly, the last owners before it then got actually back after the independence. So, yeah, exactly. So the French were the ones that had in the end the most influence in the whole area. This is also why it's today still having the French name, Gorée Island. And as a bit of a background, I already teased it, so it held a very important role in one of the greatest tragedies we had in human history, which is the Transatlantic slave trade. So as a bit of a background, because it was also for me, you know generally speaking about it, but to give it a little bit of a more information what we're talking about there. So what is called the Transatlantic slave trade is the multiple events that took place from the mid-1500s up to the 1860s. Where European slavers forcibly shipped more or around than 12.5 million Africans onto transatlantic ships. It's estimated that about 11 million of those served the passage to the Americas, which, just thinking about the pure numbers, about 1.5 million people died just on the voyage to the Americas, and then not talking about the tragedy and the horrors that those people then faced when they arrived in the Americas. And the transatlantic slave trade, so it involved like captives being taken from dozens of coastal regions spreading from West and Central Africa. And this was unfortunately something that shaped for a very, very long time the history of Gorée as an important collection, holding, and also embarkation point in this whole vast system of slave trade. So this is a bit of a background of the bigger historical event that shaped part of this island's history, unfortunately. And it is assumed that for more than 300 years that the island of Gorée was involved in the capture, detention, and deportation of enslaved Africans. It was in the end, so slavery was abolished in the year 1848 by the French. And this ironically is also then when the role of the island diminished, because its main importance, unfortunately, was still about this. So what I also learned, it was not just slaves that were shipped there. So it was in general a trading area. So you would also have other products that were traded around there, but it is known, unfortunately, until today for its role in the slave trade. And so slavery was abolished by the French in 1848. And when today's capital of Senegal, Dakar, was founded in 1857, you have to, when you see it on a map, like Gorée is like really, really super close to Dakar. So I think it's like a 3 kilometer of distance. So as you can imagine, when then Dakar was founded, became more and more bigger and more important, then also Gorée lost its economic and administrative influence. So where it shifted more towards its historical remembrance and importance, what we know it especially about today.
So basically, in Gorée, they were, if I am understanding correctly, like there was a lot of appropriation of African drove to Gorée, and then there was the market, and different powers around the world just buy slaves there, or how it worked, this transaction part?
So if I understood, it was not necessarily as a market, it was as a transition point. So you would bring people from various places around to Gorée, which was then unfortunately one of the central points where they were then afterwards loaded on slave ships going to the Americas. So I did not find any details if there were necessarily markets or so, but also considering the size of the island. So I think it was mostly as a hub where you would
to transfer to bigger ships, I guess.
Transfer around. But this is actually something where I'm going to talk about later, which is also indicating the sort of discussion that Gorée entitles. But so it was mostly because of its location, it would be a point where then people would be transferred over to the Americas as slaves. Yeah.
Understood.
Yeah. And yes, so when it lost sort of its administrative and economic importance, over the following years or decades, it shifted more towards preservation memory as a function of the island. So first, it was declared as a historic site from Senegal in 1944 by the Colonial administration. I think 1944, I do not know if Senegal was already independent. So I assume it might have actually been still the French administration around there. And then in 1978, it was inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, recognized as a exceptional testimony to one of humanity's greatest tragedies, which is, like I mentioned before, the transatlantic slave trade. And today, this is the main role it still serves. So it is home to about 2,000 residents, and it's actually Senegal's most visited heritage site. It serves globally as a memorial to the horror of the slave trade. And it is generally also considered as a place of reconciliation and remembrance for the African diaspora and the tragedy that befell the African people because of the slave trade.
Something that surprised me is the amount of people that actually lived in the island for being so small.
Yeah, it's, as I understood, there is a lot of local artisan, obviously also people working in tourism a bit. So I think there are 2 or 3 hotels also around. There are a few restaurants. So you still have people living around there. But yeah, it is obviously nothing to compare with with Dakar or anything else. But yeah, like you mentioned, it's also a very small island still, yes. And yeah, and also coming back to its importance as a memorial site. So it is not just a place where people that are interested in the topic or might also have connection to it, obviously, going to. It's actually a place where you will see in the past a lot of world leaders come there to have show respect to all the victims of this terrible tragedy. So for example, you would have Nelson Mandela, you would have Pope John Paul II and Barack Obama coming there to show respect and remember the people or the whole the suffering that occurred on there. And that is actually also a good transition to explaining why it is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. What do you think? What could be the number of criteria that it matches?
The number of criteria that it matches. For sure, remember it's a site that remembers history and a dark part of history, but a history nonetheless. So maybe because of his nature, I will say 2.
Close. It's actually only 1. But what you mentioned, it is the criteria number 6. So it is tied to historical events. In this case, absolutely true. A horrible event. Because it's directly tied to one of the greatest human tragedies, the transatlantic slave trade. And I actually want to read here the statement that you can find on the official UNESCO website explaining why it meets criteria 6. The island of Gorée is an exceptional testimony to one of the greatest tragedies in the history of human societies, the slave trade. The various elements of this memory island, fortresses, buildings, streets, squares, etc., recount each in its own way the history of Gorée, which from the 15th to the 19th century was the largest slave trading center of the African coast. And this is like framing it why it is so significant, but it's also what I want to mention already here, especially this last part, like it was the largest slave trading center of the African coast, is gonna come back later when I'm talking about of the controversy when it comes to
I do have a question though. That means the infrastructure in the island of Gorée, it's all still resemble of the slave trade. So all the houses that were used for the trading, what you say, like the walls and
I do not know if it's all that it used to be, but you for sure still find buildings from colonial times and this slave trading times around there. So there's fortresses and also houses that were associated with the slave trade. This is what you still find there, yes. And actually, one of them is the most famous, probably, is actually called the House of Slaves, or the Maison des Esclaves in French. Again, sorry for butchering French.
You don't do that in every episode.
I know, like for some reason, every episode has some French elements. So this is actually the most famous element probably you have on the island. It was supposedly built between the years 1776 and 1984, and it is until today considered the most emotionally charged site on Gorée. It has become really famous or well known by its longtime curator, a man known as Boubacar Joseph Ndaye. I hope I pronounced it some way correctly, because he claimed that millions of enslaved Africans passed through this house, and it had also something which is called a door of no return, which is a really simple, just cut out door in the walls, which faces the Atlantic Ocean. And it symbolizes the last moment that enslaved Africans would see their homeland before they were deported on ships to Americas. And it is said that visitors of the House of Slaves, especially if they have any kind of relation to the African diaspora, they will experience deep personal or emotional reactions on this side, and also to the storytelling of this gentleman. I think he died a few years ago, so he is not alive anymore. But he is until today largely credited for also shaping the influence of Gorée Island and the House of Slaves and the importance that it holds for the memorial there. And there's a short tip. You can visit the website that I talked about before, the Zamani project, that offers sort of a virtual 3D tour of the House of Slaves. So you can go through to it and check it a little bit out. And I was doing this as a research to this episode, also to get a bit of understanding. It's obviously today like not really, you do not see like how it really looked like. So it's mostly now turned into a memorial site, but you can check that out and just get a bit of a feeling of the place without having to actually visit Gorée. And yes, this is actually now where the difficult part of this episode comes for me in, because
the slaving part, no. I think that since the very beginning.
That's what I meant. But this is now where for me the difficult, because as you learn from this right now, this place has a really deep symbolic meaning for everybody that is affected or also just wants to know about this horrible tragedy. And I would like to ask you a question in advance before I give you more of the information, what became for me a bit difficult about it, which is about the question symbolic significance versus historical data and records. So if a place becomes like a global symbol of suffering, as is now the case with Gorée Island, do you think it matters whether every part of the story is historically precise or accurate, or can just the symbolic truth be enough for it to achieve the status that, for example, Gorée Island has?
I think that when you're doing that question, it's obvious that it's related to the fact that maybe it's not the biggest concentration, or didn't have the biggest concentration of slaves in the slave market of Africa, which means some of the data that brings its importance is probably not accurate. Nevertheless, for me, it's more important the symbol. Why? I mean, in the end of the day, what a symbol or a memorial intends to do is actually bring to the new generations this information, somehow bring what is the consequences of believing that certain races are over other races. And I think that as a symbolic nature, it should be conserved. Even though probably that's the reason why you're asking, not all the historical information is accurate or can be proved.
That's a very good guess that you have, because this is exactly what the sort of controversies that I found online are about. So I think we both agree, and what is just very important to state, you cannot put any kind of number on suffering. So like nobody is debating here the horrors of anything associated with the transatlantic slave trade. So this is what I think for both of us is clear. You cannot put any kind of number on this.
Also, I think that the more memorials there are, the best. So I even think that, like, even if it's not the most biggest trade center of slaves, just the fact that it existed needs to bring up to reality and being conserved as it is.
Yeah,
as a symbol.
I will quickly guide you through the information I found online, which caused this controversy, and just curious to see if this will change your opinion in any way. I do not think, but I would be curious. So yeah, exactly as you mentioned. So the first one where apparently some historians disagree is the volume of the slave traffic. So especially with the kind of statement, we remember what UNESCO also said in its reason. It was the largest slave trading center of the African coast. So this is by some historians not supported, or they argue that there are a lot of places that might fit better in a way for this kind of information. So I do not want to go into any kind of numbers here, because as I mentioned before, it doesn't matter in the end how much, but a lot of people there are historians that say it did not have its significance in numbers, or it was not the largest trading ports as it is at the moment often shown.
Do you know, you could research what are the other sites that could actually have this title, or as the biggest concentration of the slave market in the world from the African continent?
So what I found is that apparently two ports, one is called St. Louis and the other is called James Ford, are actually also thought often to have been the largest ports when it comes to the transatlantic slave trade. I assume there have unfortunately been a lot of places that were involved with this.
I mean, we're talking about millions.
Yeah, we're talking about millions of people over centuries of time,
5 centuries.
And unfortunately a really large scale trading business with human lives. But from what I found in the research is that those two ports are often cited as the one that they might have had larger numbers of slaves actually transported to the Americas. Yeah.
Well, I think that if it's about UNESCO specific information, I would say yes, it would be nice to have a little bit more of accuracy. Okay, it's one of the places that had the most slaves in the traffic to the Americas. That would be a nice thing, a little bit more accuracy. But in the end of the day, I would like these 3 places to actually be memorials. I don't know if they are, but that will be the expectation, even if only one can have the final title from the UNESCO. I mean, let's have also, I think that this is a big question, and I think that this is something we have discussed in the past, is that one of the things that make a World Heritage Site sometimes is the uniqueness. And maybe if it's not the only one of it, it could be controversial to actually have the title, but at the same time, they are memorial. They need to be conserved. They need to be brought to the new generation. So maybe it could even be a bundle, there is many sites that are commemorated in different places at the same time.
That's a good idea, that you could say, okay, like it might be another approach, that you're looking at like multiple port towns that were unfortunately involved in this. And
exactly,
that's a good take that you say, like especially in recent years, like you will have a lot of different multi-location sites. I think at the time when Gorée was inscribed, of course, it was the first year of the UNESCO World Heritage Site. That might not have been a consideration yet. But that's actually a good take, like as a way, okay, how could this sort of question about the accuracy of the statement that UNESCO has put there, how could this be solved? But obviously this is also, that's something that is discussed in the World Heritage traveling community. And so and the controversy that I also found is not just about the island of Gorée by itself, but also actually about the House of Slaves. So there seem to be some historians that argue that the house was not sort of a trading point or like a point where the slaves were put onto ships, but it was the private house of a wealthy family. And there were most likely slaves there, but they were also most likely like domestic slaves serving the family and not captives awaiting the deportation. And there is apparently the sort of discussion that the portrayal of this longtime curator that I mentioned before, it has shaped the narrative of the house and its importance towards this thing, and that it is therefore now remembered as a memorial and associated with the slave trade, and not because of actually it having served in the past as this kind of thing. And that is something that I found interesting, because when I was checking at some reports from travelers around there and also from this World Heritage traveling community that we like to visit, some visitors seem to be really off-put by the fact that it's presented like this when you go on tours around there. But obviously there were also people, like when you would actually bring up this kind of discussions to the people around there, that is obviously not well received at all. So I think I saw one comment that was saying, like, so if you would go and tell somebody, like, you would confront the guide with this fact, hey, it's not really sure if it was it had this function. That's apparently the same as if you would like deny that there was the Holocaust. So like really saying, like, how can you even question what happened around there? And that is also like conflicting for me, because on the one hand, I like to be sure that I get accurate information on a place, but on the other hand, well, who am I to decide what a site means as a memorial to the people that were actually affected by it?
That's exactly the point. And I think that as something that my husband recently said to me, read the room. You know what I mean? Like, these kind of debates can be made in an academic kind of situation when it's actually we're talking actually about accuracy and history accuracy, or in other kind of like maybe online discussions. But sometimes I feel like really people do not know how to read the room. And if you go to a place that has been so affected by something so horrible for generations, well, probably everybody in that island had somebody that was like a generation before, or 2 generations before, 3 generations before, that were sent to the Americas, and you ask them this. I mean, even if it's not accurate, you have to really be careful, because you are really kind of saying like, yeah, but this may not be true. You know what I mean? So, and it's true, maybe not be true, but it's the symbol. Again, we come back to, for me at least, this is my personal opinion, the symbol matter most in this case than the historical accuracy.
I think for me, as somebody, if I were visiting the island, I would like to know about this debate, but I wouldn't also say, like, out of respect for the people around there and out of the respect what it means, I would not bring it up. So I could then still make the choice if I'm going to the island. If it really bothers me how it is portrayed, I might not visit the House of Slaves, because I was like, you know what, I can make up my own choice. And then if I disagree with how it might be presented and that there are not both sides, let's say like this, shown of the historical discussion, then I will not go. But I think I agree with you there in a sense, truly, that like I will not rub it into somebody's face in a way and like telling, hey, this, by the way, you cannot be sure about this. This is then here about respect. And as it has become so clear how important Gorée is for millions and millions of people affected by this horrific event in history, who am I to put this in any kind of question to say like, okay, that is not okay. So I think there's an also, it's good to know about it and to just be in a way an educated traveler, but also be respectful in the end to the people.
And also I think that it is important also to remember that these millions of people actually saw their land one last time at some point. And I think that this is probably what I would take out of this house. At some point in a boat already, or maybe in this island, or maybe somewhere else.
It might not have been Gorée, but
they saw
millions of people, So it's, even if they were not in the door of no return to make a last look to the land of their origin, they have had a place where they were for the last time able to see their home.
Their home, their land, their family, the people that matters the most. And I think that this is the symbol of this house. Being able to feel how it felt for these million of Africans the last time that they saw it. And to think that they will never see it again, because for many generations it was probably obvious, especially after 100 years of slavery, that they were not going to come back.
But you can now understand a bit like what for me was like a bit of tough in the research of this, because I really like to get into the historical details, and then that gives you here like an emotional discussion. I mean, like, okay, the importance what you discussed, symbolism with historical accuracy. And I think the learning that I took from this research is like, well, it is not always a black and white question. So it is not about it has to be 100% that, 100% that. Obviously, the best is if it can somehow manage both, but sometimes it becomes a difficult question.
And I think that this is going to be a constant question, especially for the World Heritage sites that are actually memorials to something horrible. We have plenty of them, and we will have plenty of these questions in the future. But I think that at the same time, we have to have an equilibrium between, what is real and what it means. And sometimes this line is going to be blurred, and sometimes we have to understand and accept it. As a traveler, I will say like it's our responsibility as a travelers to know the history and to probably create our own point of view, how we see things. But we also have the responsibility to respect the places we visit. And this is two things that can happen at the same time. We need to be clear where and when are we sharing our point of view and with what audience. And as well, this is important. So I think that we as a tourists and as a travelers, we have a lot of responsibilities, and sometimes we are not as outspoken about it as we should. It's our responsibility to take care of the place, to respect what it means, even if it's not 100% historically exact, to know where we can share what we think about.
I think that's a nice closing paragraph to this
Thank you.
kind of discussion. Not to the episode, no, still something to come. Still something to come, but I think it's a nice summary point of the discussion and like what you need to be aware of. And since you mentioned already travelers, I think I will take this now as a natural transition point to go some of the information what you should know if you want to visit the island of Gorée.
The tips.
The tips, indeed. Okay, you do it better. So, so how do you get to Gorée Island? So, as I mentioned...
In boat.
Yes, you do. So, as I mentioned, it is really close to the capital of Senegal, Dakar. So, you can reach it really via ferry, which is departing multiple times per day from Dakar's Gare Maritime. So that's like the boat station, I think would then be the English translation. I would suggest that when you are actually going there, check online the updated schedules, because I do not know how up to date what I found online is when you're listening to this episode. But on an average scale, it says, okay, apparently the boats leave like every 1 to 2 hours. They are starting quite early in the morning, and they are running also pretty late. So it takes apparently about 25 to 30 minutes to go from Dakar to the island, and you should normally arrive 1 hour earlier than your departure. So you can buy tickets or navigate long queues, especially apparently on weekends where it's more busy in general. What I found as an important information is like you must show a physical passport to buy or use a ticket. So photocopies are not accepted. I know this might be relevant for some travelers that are like us, that will not always bring to these kind of locations the physical passports, but only copies. At the time of recording, the costs are about $11 or €9 something per passenger for foreign visitors. And normally it is recommended that you plan it as like a day trip from Dakar. So you can stay on Gorée Island by itself. It has a few small hotels if you want to have more quiet or atmospheric experience and explore also like a little bit of the island at night. But generally it's assumed if you just want to visit the most important sites of the island, then a day trip is enough. Some general best practices, like, you will walk a lot there, so wear comfortable footwear. It's car free around there, so it's really just walking. It is apparently a cash only environment, so for restaurants, cafes, and like the little markets around there, they are accepting only cash. It is also recommended that if you like this and if you're in it, like, so there are a few local artisans where you can get like handmade crafts and artwork, which is apparently a great way to support the local economy of the island. I don't think I need to highlight it specifically, but just in case, like, we're talking here about Senegal and Africa, so bring sun protection, especially when you're going to walk around a lot. And it is recommended, so if you want to fully understand the complex history, you should consider doing a guided tour from Dakar, where you can also in pre-advance book a local guide, but you can also apparently more spontaneously find guides that might explain it to you on the ferry arrival point and like negotiate something there. And about some of the must-visit places, which is tying back to the question you had before about the infrastructure and can you still see the remains of actually the colonial times. So as mentioned before, the House of Slaves and the Door of No Return is probably the most famous site that you will have around there. It is apparently closed on Mondays, but open the rest of the week. The entry fee at the time of recording is about $1, so pretty cheap. But next to this, you can also, of course, just stroll around the island by itself. So you can explore the streets, the life and the architecture, which is still having like really colonial atmosphere as I saw it. So you have houses with like pastel facades. You have like really interesting details around there. You can visit open art galleries and craft stalls where the local artisans sell paintings. So it apparently has really an arts area or like an artistic atmosphere around there. You can go to waterfront restaurants which serve fresh seafood and classic Senegalese dishes. I got a recommendation, you should go there and eat chicken yassa, which is apparently chicken with onion sauce and rice, which sounds super tasty.
That sounds delicious.
Yeah. And next to this, you can also go to fortifications. So for example, you can climb to the highest island point, which is often called the castle, where 2 French cannons from the Second World War still stand. And you can also visit the Gorée Island Memorial at the southern tip, which is a concrete monument dedicated to the victims of the slave trade. And apparently around there, the cliffside has also a really nice view of the whole island. There is also something on the island called the Statue of the Liberation of Slave, which is a sculpture of a man and a woman embracing as their chains fall away. You have the Historical Museum of Senegal, which is in an ancient fortress built in the 19th century. And this museum presents the broader history, not only of Gorée Island, but also of Senegal.
That sounds so nice. I feel like it would be the perfect day trip, especially thinking that I was not expecting it to have so many museums on the island. So again, really small island, and it's really impressive the amount of museums and historical places you can actually visit.
It does, yeah. So yeah, that was a little bit of, I think so far, the most haunting side in a way, like tackling one of the most horrific events we had in human history.
Yeah.
Coming a little bit like in a bit of a verdict, because I think we obviously know that like World Heritage Sites are something that is important for us to visit, but on the other hand, like there are by now so many. So I thought like I would like to ask you the question. We have here our app where we're tracking our wish list for World Heritage Sites that we should visit in the next 5 years. Is Gorée Island for you making it on the list or not?
I will say yes, but I have a really specific reason, and it's the fact that I didn't know about it before. I mean, of course, I'm Colombian. We receive a lot of slaves from Africa, a lot, especially to work in the sugar plantains, especially in the north of Colombia. And I think that it's really surprising to me how little I know about this period of time, in knowing that, of course, we know the story of how the liberation happens in Colombia and for African Colombians, but at the same time, I don't know much of their time and the generations before in Africa. And this is concerning in certain way for myself, like como Lina, you should know. I mean, of course, I know about the Convention of Berlin, when, well, we all know pretty much the colonial powers divided the territory of Africa. But after that, what I know, it's really little. And I think that it should be in my top list to learn more about these horrible times, because it was so long and it actually impacted who I am today. So yes, I would say yes, it is. And It would be really bad if it wouldn't be there.
Okay. We're going to come back in 5 years and see if we actually made it to Gorée Island by then. But that's a very fair point, I can only say. I mean, like, never crossed, obviously, my mind that this would be a reason. But on the other hand, we do not have the same cultural background, which I think is one of the interesting parts of this podcast and our different perspectives of it. So never would have thought it, but it makes absolutely sense. Yeah.
Well, never say never.
Never say never, yeah.
And I am waiting for you guys, our audience, to promote the podcast so we can go to Senegal anytime soon.
Wow.
Please do not forget to visit us as World Heritage Rookies and in our Instagram account. And thank you so much. See you next time.
Yes, next time it's gonna be an episode from you, Lina, right? Do you want to spoil a little bit what we're gonna talk about?
No. I think that it's gonna be quite going a little bit out of like his sad historical events, but not so much. So we are in there a little bit.
Well, then I'm looking forward to it. Until then, thank you everybody and goodbye.
Goodbye.